welcome once again to Caleb Blake's Books. Today I have a top 5 video for you about some Star Wars books because May I am focusing on Star Wars books here on this channel, and today I'm going to be talking about some underrated Star Wars Legends or Expanded Universe books, particularly my top 5 most underrated. Obviously, you know, there's more books than this that I think are kind of underrated, and I have not read all of the EU. I've probably read somewhere around a third or a little bit more if I had to guess. So I've still got a lot to read, and once I'm more well-read in the EU, I will probably make another video similar to this. But right now, these are just the 5 books that I consider to be the most underrated out of the ones that I have read. So first one up at number 5, I have the book Rogue Planet by Greg Bear. This is a prequel-era book, specifically taking place between episode 1 and 2, which is an interesting time period because it seems like there's not a whole lot of stuff taking place during that period, either in canon or in Legends, so it's very interesting. This book follows a young Obi-Wan and Anakin master and apprentice duo in between episodes 1 and 2 as they journey to the planet Zonoma Sakat, which is kind of a living planet. I think this book is really great for several reasons. First of all, obviously, because it's a specific period of time that's not explored a whole lot in Star Wars books, I do really appreciate that about it. I also really love the way that Anakin and Obi-Wan are handled in this book. I think that their relationship is really interesting. I really enjoyed the way they're written and the way they bounce off each other and stuff, and it's also just cool to see these characters at this point in their life, because a lot of other Star Wars books tend to focus either on, you know, these characters specifically, more so like Obi-Wan, before The Phantom Menace, or in the case of both of them, after episode 2. You don't get a whole lot in between those two movies. So it's interesting to see these two characters at this point in their life, and also I really liked the world building in this book with the planet of Zonoma Sakat, which is this kind of weird living planet. It's very interesting and very unique concept, and it's something that I really enjoyed exploring. Number 4 is going to be the only book in a series on this list. It is a book in a trilogy, and that is going to be Darksaber by Kevin J. Anderson. This is the second book of the Callista trilogy. Now, I am not really a big fan of the Callista trilogy. The other two books, Planet of Twilight and Children of the Jedi, are some of my least favorite Legends books, to be quite honest. I do not really like those books very much, but I do really like Darksaber, and I think it is very underrated, especially because the Callista trilogy tends to be looked at as, you know, this tends to be the favorite of the trilogy from what I've seen, but the trilogy overall doesn't get much attention because a lot of people just don't care for it that much. But I do really enjoy this book a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. I had a great time reading it. I think especially if you are a fan of the Jedi Academy trilogy, which even though I don't love that trilogy, it does hold a special place in my heart. It was the first EU stuff that I read that was like original book storylines. And so, you know, I do have a big soft spot for that trilogy, and this book ties into that trilogy very heavily, and I really enjoyed that about it. You get a lot of returning characters from that trilogy and things like that, and it was just a great book in general. Just a lot of fun to read, great cast of characters, and some really cool events in it that I really enjoyed, and I especially enjoyed the return of Dala from the Jedi Academy books, as well as other characters like Dorsk 81 and different characters like that. A lot of cool stuff in this book that I really enjoyed. So especially if you're a fan of the Jedi Academy trilogy, I would recommend this one. You know, I think this could theoretically be read as a standalone. The Callista trilogy to me, and even I think more officially, are kind of a trilogy, but they're not entirely. They're kind of 3 standalones that all kind of have some through lines, so they are kind of an unofficial trilogy. So you could theoretically read this book by itself as well if you'd like to. And even then, I personally would not very highly recommend the first book or the third book in the trilogy. But, you know, if you want to read those two, go ahead. At number 3, I have Maul Lockdown by Joe Schreiber, which is actually the first of 2 Joe Schreiber books on this list, funnily enough. He wrote 3 adult books for Star Wars Legends, and I have read 2 of those 3. And the other one that I read is going to be appearing on this list as well, which is funny. I didn't even realize that until I was just talking about it. But I do really love this book a lot. This book, I think, does a great job with Maul's character. This takes place, obviously, before The Phantom Menace. and focuses on Maul being sent on a mission to this kind of prison in order to do some stuff there. Been a little bit since I've read this one, so I don't remember the plot super well, but I did really love this book. It left a big impression on me. I had a great time reading it. I thought it was a very interesting book plot-wise. I was always really interested in seeing what new revelations there was going to be. I was always interested in seeing the situations Maul was going to get into. Seeing him in this setting of this prison ship was also really interesting. And even though it's not necessarily a selling point for me, another very notable thing about this book is that it's very violent for a Star Wars book. So if you are one of those people who is really into, you know, very violent books or something like that, or if you are very much not into very violent books, you know, you may want to either steer clear of this one or make this a high priority. But it was a lot of fun to read, partially for that reason. It was just interesting to see, you know, how far Joe Schreiber would go with this book, because it gets pretty intense sometimes. But even that aside, I thought it was a really interesting book. I really liked how it handled Darth Maul, and really cool plot, all kinds of stuff. It was just a very entertaining book to read, and so that's why it makes this list. My number 2 book is going to be the other Joe Schreiber book that I have read, which is Red Harvest. Of course, the one that I have not yet read is Death Troopers. I'm curious if that would have ended up on this list if I had read it already. But I really enjoy Red Harvest. Red Harvest I read in one single sitting in like 2.5 hours. It was a super quick read. I had such a fun time with Red Harvest. The one caveat to this that I will say is this is not a great book in terms of characters and plot. They are kind of interesting characters and plot, I think, but they're not what I would go into this book expecting necessarily. But this book is so entertaining and so fun to read. This book is essentially Star Wars but with zombies. It follows people on like a Sith training planet, training facility, you know, that kind of thing. And this zombie virus breaks out because one of the Sith Lords was messing with some stuff and accidentally set loose a zombie virus. And so it is a very, you know, obviously a lot of these characters, it's not going to go very well for them. So in terms of character arcs and things like that, it's pretty, you know, not super deep. But this is a very fun, entertaining, action-packed book that I just had a blast with. You know, it's very unique as well, which I appreciate. So I just had a great time with this book. So that's why it makes this list as well. And my number 1 that I picked for this list is going to be Yoda Dark Rendezvous by Sean Stewart. This is a book that I really loved a lot, but I don't see get talked about all that much. I've seen it get talked about a little bit more since it came out in the Essential Legends collection, but even then I don't see this one talked about much. But I really loved this book a lot. The main premise for this book is it follows primarily Yoda as well as a couple other Jedi characters doing some stuff, but Yoda gets this invitation from Dooku, who was previously his apprentice, who at this point, you know, has turned Sith and all that stuff. This takes place during the Clone Wars, and he gets this invitation to meet up with Dooku. And so he's going to do that. The other characters are involved in that in interesting ways as well, and doing a bunch of other stuff. And the thing I really loved about this book was the way that it examined and talked about the Force. This book has some really interesting insights into things like the nature of the light side and the dark side and the Force itself and things like that that I thought were really interesting. And I love digging into that stuff in Star Wars. That's one of the things that makes it very intriguing to me as a setting. And so for me, this book really worked in that aspect. And I had a great time with it. And in addition to that, the character work was really well done. The plot was interesting, all that stuff. It was just a really fun book to get into, but I especially really enjoyed those more deeper kind of thematic discussions that this book had in it. So I would highly recommend this one if you haven't read it before. And I would say it is, for me, the most underrated Legends book that I have read so far. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these and what you thought of them. And if there are any other Star Wars Legends books that you have read that you think are particularly underrated, let me know those in the comments as well. As I said, I have not read a significant portion of the Legends books, so there's plenty more that I'm sure would have appeared on this list if I had read them by now, and I assume, you know, later on, once I've read more of them, I may do another version of this video updated to include more books that I find underrated, because I really enjoy, especially in Star Wars, something that has so many books, finding ones that don't get talked about much that are still really cool. So let me know in the comments any that you have, or what your thoughts on these ones are, or anything like that. That's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.